There are literally thousands of languages spoken here on planet Earth. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself where they all came from? At the very beginning, God saw to it that people would be divided into many geographical and ethnic groups. And a real quick way of doing this was to supernaturally cause people to need lots of translators. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Our series is God and the Nations, and today, Dr. Lutzer is tracing our earliest roots in the book of Genesis. He's speaking on the origin of the nations, and we'll discover today why there are so many mother tongues.
They were all unified. But in chapter 10, we have the table of the nations, about 70 different nations and their origins. So it seems clear that the author of Genesis decided to move in the text thematically rather than chronologically. You see, in chapter 11, we are told why the nations are scattered, and in chapter 10, he gives us how and where they were scattered to. Now, that only makes sense because, you see, at the end of chapter 9, he's talked about the three sons of Noah. So now what he wants to do is to simply tell us where they ended up after the experience of the Tower of Babel. It's best to look at the text that way. Now, you know that the nations were united. God had said, fill the earth, but they decided to live together. It says in verse 3 of chapter 11, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But God says, if they get away with this, he says, they have begun to do this. Nothing they plan, verse 6, to do will be impossible for them. And God says, they did not scatter willingly. I shall force them to scatter upon the face of the earth. What's going on here? They go to a plain in Shinar, which is really modern-day Babylon. And they say to themselves, we are going to build a tower that will reach the heavens. Now remember that stars are often identified with satanic powers. That's why the Bible says that Satan reached and a third of the stars went with him. So what they wanted to do evidently, and this becomes clear later on when the Bible talks about the sins of Babylon, what they wanted to do is to build a tower by which they would be able to actually not reach the stars, but communicate with, quote, the stars, the powers that be, the demonic spirits, basically, in the heavens. Now remember, when God created the stars, he said of the sun and the moon that they shall be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And some people believe also that the stars were for signs. And there's evidence of that. Years ago, I read a book entitled The Gospel in the Stars. And I was very critical of the book, but I was amazed at how many messages God might have wanted to communicate via the stars. Did you know that in the book of Job, there's not only a reference to the constellation Orion and several others, but in chapter 38, Job uses the word Mazzaroth. And if you look that word up, it very probably refers to the zodiac. Now, here's what happened. If God was going to use the stars as signs, clearly the stars were not created randomly. They had to be created in certain relationships to one another, certain juxtapositions, so that there could be some sense made of them and some images in the heavens. And that's the way, evidently, God created and intended the stars to be a kind of Bible that people would be able to look at and read. But here's what happened in Babylon. They perverted it. And astronomy, which has to be one of the most exciting sciences one could be involved in. If I could go to college again and have an opportunity to study a course in astronomy, I would take it. The beauty of the heavens, the juxtaposition of the stars, the various constellations. What a study. But astronomy collapsed and was perverted into what we now call astrology. People began to look at the stars now for individual guidance. Am I born under this sign? Am I born under that sign? That's going to determine what I'm going to do. And God says over and over again in the Bible, I hate it. It is an abomination. Because you're supposed to seek me for guidance. And you can read into the stars anything that you want. And behind astrology is the spirit world, but it's the wrong spirit world. And so God hated what happened in Babylon. And throughout the Bible, you have frequent references as Babylon as the mother of all abominations, because what they were going to do is to set up a humanistic religion that did not rely on the living God, that relied on the creature and not the Creator. God says, I'm going to scatter you. So what he did is every family unit suddenly began talking a different language. And so they couldn't get along together. There was no way that they could communicate. And so this family group had to go in this direction and find its way without any roads, without any compasses. This family group had to go its way, and so the nations were scattered. And in the 10th chapter of Genesis, you have where they were scattered to. Isn't it interesting that during the day of Pentecost, what God did is he reversed the curse of the Tower of Babel. Because, as we shall see, one of the purposes God has in history is that while sin scatters and divides, at the end of time, God is going to reconcile and bring together. And Pentecost, among other things, was a brief look at the way in which God is going to bring people from every tongue and tribe and nation and have them understand each other and be unified once again. Now we've spoken very briefly about the origin of the nations, also about the scattering of the nations. And now, what is God's purpose in the nations? How do we understand that? For this